Star Wars is set in a galaxy mired in bureaucracy, from the endless armies of Senate regulators to everyday starport officials. Some bureaucrats handled relatively minor duties, but others were incredibly important to galactic civilization. Some agencies could transform society with the slightest regulation, wielding incredible power that most beings were largely unaware of. And of all the bureaucracies in the galaxy, one had more power than any other: the Bureau of Ships and Services. This regulatory leviathan was positively ancient, and if it really wanted to, it had the power to bring any planet, fleet, or galactic government to its knees. The power to unravel galactic civilization itself. The Bureau of Ships and Services was founded sometime in 18,000 BBY, during the Great Manifest period, a time when Republic explorers were pushing out into the Rim and the Republic was transforming from a government of the core worlds to a galaxy-spanning union. It started as a Republic-chartered regulatory agency tasked with keeping records of starship, spacer, and astrographical information, but it quickly evolved into an independent entity. It worked alongside whatever government ruled the galaxy at the time, almost always remaining neutral in the conflict, but it managed its own affairs, and not even the Empire dared to challenge its independence. In the Imperial period, the Bureau of Ships and Services was one of the most ancient and powerful institutions in the galaxy, and its power, massive size, and history made BOSS a very insular and tightly knit organization. It had its own internal customs, traditions, and even its own language. A few families had been running the Bureau for aeons, which meant that BOSS was both very hard to infiltrate and also had lots of secrets. This also meant that getting around BOSS regulations was extraordinarily difficult. Something as simple sounding as falsifying papers not only required a top-tier forger to stand up to Bureau scrutiny, but also a top-tier slicer to plant the false information into BOSS's meticulously curated databanks. The price of messing with the Bureau was high enough that very few even considered doing such things in the first place. The Bureau also had a good working relationship with the governmental authorities that shared its field. During the time of the Republic, the Bureau cooperated closely with the Republic Navy and the judicial forces, ensuring that any rule breakers were brought to justice. During the Imperial era, the Bureau collaborated with the Imperial Navy, specifically a branch of the Navy called the Imperial Space Ministry. The ministry imposed a variety of regulations on spaces on top of BOSS's own regulations, and these rules together made up the Imperial Spacefaring Regulations. BOSS was highly accomplished at catching those that broke these rules, and they would hand those who broke Imperial regulations over to the Navy. In turn, the Empire punished those who broke BOSS's rules as harshly as those who broke Imperial law. As for what the Bureau actually did, it handled a few key aspects of space travel. For starters, it kept extensive records about starships and the spaces that used them, keeping track of ship registration, transponder codes, spaces, various licenses, and various statistics about starships, such as their hyperdrive capability and attached weapons. BOSS passed regulations on what sort of modifications could or couldn't be made to starships, and their officials enforced them too. BOSS datapads containing all information relevant to a space's licensing, permits, and criminal record, as well as key information about their starships, were issued to all spaces once they got their starships registered, and these pads were essentially the standard permits at most ports. The Bureau had offices at most of the galaxy's spaceports, and their officials inspected starships whenever they docked. BOSS officials were meticulous, and unlike Imperial officials, they usually couldn't be easily bribed, meaning that it was extremely difficult to get anything past them. It wasn't impossible, and BOSS officials in different parts of the galaxy tended to have different standards. An infraction that could cost you your ship in the core might easily be swept under the rug in the Outer Rim. Still, BOSS officials weren't to be trifled with, and anyone bending or breaking the Bureau's regulations had to be careful about it if they didn't want to get caught. But none of this was what made the Bureau of Ships and Services so powerful. That was the fact that they essentially controlled hyperspace. The Bureau kept track of navigational data and hyperspace routes across the galaxy, and virtually everyone relied on that data in order to travel through space. BOSS's officials not only kept records of every celestial body and hyperspace route that had been publicly charted, but they also kept track of the changes caused by the proper motion of celestial bodies through the galaxy, updating hyperspace routes whenever it was necessary. Whenever a starship docked at a port where BOSS had an office, all of its navigational data would be remotely and automatically downloaded into BOSS's databanks, allowing the Bureau to keep track of changes and ensure that the charts remained up to date. At the same time, the starship's own navigational charts would be automatically updated with new information from the BOSS databanks, ensuring that everyone had the data they needed to be able to fly. Despite this, there were still some routes and systems that were unknown to the Bureau, and a few institutions had their own charts that were more detailed than BOSS's, among them the Jedi Order, the Trade Federation, and the Klatsuvak Guild. But for the vast majority of ships in the galaxy, their access to up-to-date hyperspace navigational data was completely under BOSS control. This made the Bureau deeply entrenched in galactic infrastructure, and it gave it incredible power even over galactic governments. BOSS was scary enough when you broke its rules. Spaces that ran afoul of BOSS regulations tended to lose their ships, end up in penal colonies, or worse. But that was nothing compared to what the Bureau was capable of doing. If it really wanted to, it could shut down trade routes at will, deny navigational data to whoever they wanted, or supply spaces with inaccurate navigational data to get them killed. If its leaders ever felt like it, the Bureau could almost instantly put a stop to hyperspace travel across the galaxy, destroying galactic civilization entirely. Commerce, fleet deployments, galaxy-wide communications. These things were only possible because the Bureau of Ships and Services allowed them to be. Fortunately for everyone, the Bureau almost always maintained a firm neutrality, working with whoever was in power and not taking a side in conflicts. In battles between Republic and Sith, Loyalists and Separatists, or Empire and Rebels, the Bureau supplied everyone with the navigational data they needed, staying out of the spotlight and focusing on the maintenance of galactic civilizations. But there were two instances where BOSS broke its neutrality, flexing its power to alter the course of galactic history. The first happened fairly early in BOSS history, at the end of the first Alsacan conflict. By 16,700 BBY, the Republic had been divided by a semi-cold civil war between Coruscant and Alsacan, whose bickering led to trade disputes, saber-rattling, and finally a few scattered battles. When the conflict threatened to heat up and blossom into a full war, however, the Bureau put its foot down. BOSS threatened to deny both sides access to hyperspace beacons and navigational data if they didn't end the conflict, and that was all it took to get the two sides to negotiate. The first Alsacan conflict ended right there, although peace between Coruscant and Alsacan ultimately didn't last. Millennia later, BOSS intervened again at the end of the Pius Dea Crusades. 1,000 years prior, the Republic had been hijacked by a violent, speciest cult known as the Pius Dea, who transformed it into a theocratic empire waging crusades against various species. After centuries, a slowly building coalition led by the Jedi Order staged a plan to unseat the cult and restore democracy and equality to the Republic. In 10,967 BBY, the Jedi Coalition made their move, orchestrating a civil war within Pius Dea ranks and making a bid to retake control of the Republic. After a year of fighting, the Bureau of Ships and Services decided to join the Jedi Coalition to prevent galactic civilization from unraveling, and when the Bureau got involved, the war ended almost immediately. BOSS was able to seed the navicomputers of every ship in the Pius Dea fleet with rogue code, which forced the ships into hyperspace, dumped them out in the middle of nowhere, then disabled their hyperdrives, dooming their crews to eventually starve to death in the depths of space. Only a portion of the Paisteia fleet was spared, and that portion was instead forced to jump to Yuquine, where it was routed by a renunciate fleet led by the Jedi. The Bureau of Ships and Services had the galaxy at their mercy. They had the power to end wars, to restructure trade as they wished, to remake the galaxy however they pleased. But they didn't. Instead, they just kept everything running, working diligently in the background to keep the trade lanes open. Like any good bureaucracy, they went largely unnoticed by the average person, and so much of the galaxy remained ignorant of their true power. So, that was our look at the Bureau of Ships and Services, the most powerful institution in the galaxy. But what do you think? Are there other agencies you'd like us to take a look at in the future? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.